Guys, we've got it wrong. We've got it wrong. Everyone's saying more property, more property. But what we're going to talk about today is the concept of the farmer. When a country needs more food, they don't really need more food specifically. They don't need more seeds in the ground. They need more farmers to produce more food. So when we relate that back to our property market, what does that mean? Who are the farmers? They are landlords. Let's talk about that today. We're talking about getting more landlords into the market and how pounded a landlord has been over the last 20 years. Stay tuned.
Whoa, juicy topic. This is something you're really passionate about.
Can you explain this in a sentence or two or three, Xanth, what I'm talking about? Can we put it? I'm maybe getting a bit complicated here, but before we start on the royal pounding of a landlord, can you just explain what we're talking about?
Well, we're just talking about, in a nutshell today, it is a very juicy topic, just how hard it's been historically for a landlord, how much they've been, I suppose, hard done by at every single turn, and why it is now unappealing to be a bit of a landlord, given that you just get taxed at every single angle. And it's not as though there's a shortage of properties per se collectively. It's just that it's so unappealing for investors, it's unappealing for developers, and it just makes it hard. So when you say we need more farmers, we need more investors out there purchasing investment properties in order for tenants to find somewhere to live.
Now, to give you an idea, our friends in Victoria introduced, they changed their land tax threshold from 300 and something grand to 50 grand, which meant every Australian in Victoria was due to pay land tax. Their property market shrunk when every other property market increased. That is the impact when you actually pinch a landlord. What happens? And I know people are saying, oh, it's all in the planning and it's all we need more builders. Building's getting expensive. But guys and girls, if you are not feeding the farmer cannot plant seeds, they cannot produce crops, they can't get food ready for a country. It is the same concept with landlords. Or should I say property providers, because when you hear the word lord, it doesn't go down too well. Now, I'm going to break this down very quickly into 6 points. The reason why I want to bring this up and surface this is a topic that we had last night. I was talking with Mel, a property manager from our office, and I said, Mel, out of interest, my property that you know in Narrowena, the house I've got in Narrowena. She goes, yeah, I know the house, been there. I said, how much do you reckon a landlord or I would pay in land tax on that property? She goes, yeah, it's, pretty average house, da-da-da. She said, oh, $1,500 a year. And I said, I pay for that house, of which I get $1,200 a week rent, $1,100. I pay for that house $580 a week in land tax. She goes, what? And this is a property manager that manages 500 properties. She goes, what do you mean? I said, I pay to provide that property to a tenant. It costs me 500, and not even interest rates, not even anything else, but just on land tax. A landlord in a suburb, if they're over the threshold of their because their landlord is over the land tax threshold, they will have to pay 500, $600 a week of land tax before the tenant even but they pay in the interest for the actual property. Item 1. Land tax.
Yep, land tax. I'm dropping these notes in comments as well for everyone to see and make a bit of a record of too. So that would be relative to the property as well.
Say that again.
That would be relative to the property. Am I not wrong in saying that? So if you were to own an apartment that you're investing, that land tax would be relatively cheaper than the $580 you're currently paying for your house in Narrowena.
That's correct. The house assessment is about 1.8, I think, a year. That's what they regard the land value as, which is probably most houses on the northern beaches now, most blocks of land. But
Yeah,
that's land tax, and apartments are cheaper. It's probably divisible by 3 or 4 actually. So
yeah,
it's better if you're a landlord. But I think out of today also something I want to do is sometimes when everyone zigs, I like to zag. So I think while landlords are exiting the market and have exited the market, I think it's quite a time to get in, good time to get in for capital
yeah,
growth reasons, for rental reasons and stuff like that. But I just wanted to alert people to, land tax alone for a landlord is a stinker. And, no, there's no one putting their hand up going, poor me, Mr. Landlord. There's no audience for it. But
yeah,
for tenants, yes. For
yeah,
tenants, yes, so their rent's gone up $100 a week. Well, the landlord's now paying $580 a week in land tax when they're over the threshold for a house. The other
yeah,
thing I wanted to mention, where the market's changed in the last 20 years, and these are big things. These pillars are reasons are being removed to hold up and prop up the reasons why landlords become landlords. The government decided to turn around and say, if you've got an investment property, we are going to charge you 0.5% interest rate more than an owner occupied property.
more than an owner occupied property. So what would that look like?
So if it's a property of $1 million and it's come along and it's a 0.5% differentiation, they've said, hey, that loan that you've got, are you living there? Yes, I am. That's a 6% interest rate. Furthermore, that property you've got, is that an investment? Yes, it is. We need to charge you 6.5% for that. So a landlord over the last 100 years, when they were borrowing money, was paying the same interest rate for an owner occupier or an investment property. And I would have
Yep,
thought an investment property would have been less risky for a bank and the government because they've
absolutely.
got rent coming in.
Yeah,
Nah. So that's been introduced to landlords. So that's increased landlords' costs proportionally by 10% on holding the asset, just because they put that division in between owner occupied rates and interest only rates,
yeah,
because they went up 0.5%. That came straight out of a landlord's pockets. Tenants did not know any difference. But all of these things that are happening with land tax going up, with the interest rate going up, then what does the landlord do? They dispose of the property or they put the rent up. Next one.
yep, next one.
Interest only or principal and interest. So the difference in a landlord's loan, landlords used to buy a unit for 500 grand and they used to never pay it off in 20 years.
Yep,
So all they did was just pay the interest.
gotcha.
Now the
Versus,
government, and when you went and got a loan, you could say, yeah, I want an interest only loan for 30 years. What happened? Another slip that happened was governments came along and banks came along and said, no, 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 no. We're only going to allow interest only loans for 3 years. After 3 years, you can reapply for the loan, but before, for the next 27 years, you didn't have to reapply. So what that means is that the holding cost for an investment property went up significantly,
yep,
because where landlords traditionally just kept it as an IO loan, an interest only loan, the IO loan got shifted to a P&I, principal and interest loan, and the landlord's repayments went up sometimes 20, 30, 40%. So if they had a mortgage of 3 grand, the mortgage went to 4 grand or 4.5 grand because it went from interest only to P&I.
interesting. So are you better off just to hold that property while you have it as that interest only loan and then release?
Sell the property.
Yeah, as in release the property.
Sure. And then what?
Then you're back to square one and finding a different one and going through the same process all over again.
4% stamp duty on the way in on each property into the
Yeah,
government's coffers.
not very appealing at all.
4% not on what you own, 4% on the entire value. So you may
Value.
only own 20% of that. And if you're paying 4%, it's a whopper. It's a whopper. Okay, next pounding.
Next, restricted income increase.
Oh, this is a good one. So if you sell the asset, if to get the highest price, you're allowed to auction it.
Yep.
Okay, guys, if you've just tuned in, we're talking about landlords getting pounded at the moment. It's a classic. No one talks about it. I love it.
This is something that Mark is very passionate about.
I'm really passionate about this. Right, so you've bought this property, you've owned it for 10 years, 20 years, blood, sweat and tears. It's stressed you for that whole time. You've provided the property to tenants its whole 10 or 20 years. If you want to sell the property, you can auction it. So you can ask everyone in the market who wants to pay the best price.
Yep.
Yet, if you want to rent the property, you cannot do that. You cannot actually ask for more rent than you're asking, effectively auctioning it by rent, as it's actually breaking the law. So now the government's come along and said, hey, Mr. Landlord, I know you've got this investment property, but you can't ask the rent you want to ask when you want to ask it.
Yep. And that's only
Not very
something that was introduced, what was it, last year? You can't have offers over for your rental property.
Yep.
For a residential rental property. That's something that was recently introduced. It's not like it's something that's been around for a long time.
Yep. So the government's come along and said, yeah, Mr. Landlord, we really don't like the way you're putting these rents up, restrict it. And the landlords turned around and thought, after the land tax pounding, after the P&I pounding, after the higher interest rate pounding, and they've thought, you know what? Can't put my rent up when I want to put it up. I could do it once a year. I don't want to be a landlord.
Yeah.
So is the problem in the market more properties, or is the problem that it's not appealing for landlords to supply rental properties to tenants in this state?
I think it's probably a collection of the two, but it's really not that appealing to be a landlord in today's market, given not only the cost of living increase, but every other corner that you get, I suppose, fisted in a way. Like, why would you want to enter something like that when it's just money out, money out, money out, and not much coming in?
Are you guys ready for the grand finale, Xanth?
Drum roll. I don't even know what the grand finale is.
This is the royal pounding. This is the roast for landlords. It's the landlord roast. Okay, you ready for this one?
Yep. Inserting drum roll here.
We're taking part of your income.
We're taking part of your income. And please elaborate on that. What do you mean by that?
It's the law. We're taking part of your income. It's the law. It's the law. Okay. What are we taking my income for? Tax? No. We're taking it for your future. So what happened in the 60s, 70s and 80s is people invested into Australian property. Can you remind me about build to rent model at the end?
Yeah.
In the 60s, 70s and 80s, people bought an investment property. They owned it. They owned it for 10 or 20 years.
Yep.
One property, and they sold it in their retirement to be self-funded retirees. Probably would have been a half of the, a quarter of Australians, maybe a third of Australians would have done that.
Yeah.
And the way they did that is they took a little bit of their income, they invested it for the future.
Yep.
The government came along and said, you know what? Everyone's sitting at this dinner table. How many of you are landlords? And a third of them put their hand up. They said, hey, you other 2/3, what are you doing? And they said, look, we would love to buy an investment property. We're actually going to be doing it. And then the other third said, look, we really just can't afford it. Can't afford it. We're a bit risk adverse. Don't want to do it. The government turned along and said, you know what, guys and girls, everyone at this table, we're going to do something for the other 2/3 of the table here. We're going to make you pay. We're going to take 10% of your wage, 9%, whatever it was at the time. We're going to call it superannuation. We're going to make you save for the future.
Yep.
And then the 2/3 of the table said, oh, we think that's great. What are you going to do with the money? Oh, well, we'll quarantine it away till you're 65 or 67. You can't spend it. Okay, but we don't want to give you 10% of our wage. That's fine. We'll get your employer to pay it. Now,
Yep.
if you haven't worked out, if you rob Peter, you got to pay Paul. So at the end of the day, it's going to come from somewhere. So yeah, sure, the employer's going to pay it, but at the end of the day, it's like now with tenants. The tenants are paying higher rents because they've taken it from landlords.
Yep.
So the problem with super is now in a $10 trillion property market. In a $10 trillion property market, we've now got
Yes.
$2.5 trillion in cash on us away from that,
Yep.
which is sitting in people's super. That traditionally used to be invested into Australian property. It used to be leveraged into Australian property. So if you had 100,000, you could borrow 400,000 and buy something for 500,000. It was leveraged. So there's unleveraged super of in part of
Yep.
$2.5 trillion. So again, it that the people that were sitting at that dinner table that had an investment property were now further restricted. It was more pounding of more landlords because another 10% of them, they were already looking after their future by having an investment property. But now 10%'s off the table for them as well.
Yep. I understand that. And I suppose that's part of a bigger conversation with what you can do with your super when it does come to purchasing a property.
Yeah. But the problem was, Xanth, it was half cooked for 20 years. For 20 years, the seed capital wasn't enough to buy a property in your super.
Yeah.
So there's been this deficiency of supply of of investor stock in the market for a long time because we've taken that 10% off the table for 25 years now.
So
No one talks about this.
it has been a bit of a shit fight, let's just call it, for the last 25 years. So collectively, and before I get onto the build to rent model that we see more and more of these days. So before we get to that though, what do you see changing in this regard? So we've gone through the super, the interest rates that expire, moving on to a P&I, high interest rates than owner occupiers. You've got your land tax plus the restricted price that you can put on your property. All of this collectively is not appealing to a landlord at all. So what do you see changing in the next 5 to 10 years?
First of all, what I have seen changing is landlords have exited the market. They've put that cash into their homes. Lower interest rate. A perfect example. Not as hard. No one telling them what to do. Let's just improve our home.
Yeah, which I suppose we did see a lot of once those interest rates really did start to rise last year. We have seen a mass exodus of landlords leaving the market, which isn't a good thing. We do need more farmers, as we had touched on earlier. But what else can change in the way of the current situation so that the farmers don't leave and we do have more farmers out there, more investment properties, more homes to place people?
Big time. Furthermore, the mum and dad investors not being supported. That's the bottom line. There's been one thing over the last 35, 40 years that was called negative gearing that was introduced to support an investor. There's been a lot more stuff taken away. Furthermore, the build to rent model where corporate companies will build 300 apartments in a suburb, 500 apartments in a suburb. And they make these, they very boldly say, we're going to rent all these out. The government has supported build to rent models and said your tax is half. So if this property is going to be a build to rent model, your tax is half. They've halved the tax of build to rent models. Halved. So for corporates, they're incentivizing. For mum and dad investors,
No. You get a royal roasting and a royal pounding.
you get roasted. You get roasted. But I hope this was interesting to everyone today, Xanth. Xanth, you got to have taken some stuff away from today that awareness wise, and you're in the industry. Imagine the people that are not.
Yeah, no, this certainly has been enlightening to me. I've not been in the industry for as long as Mark. I don't have that 25 years worth of experience behind me. So it's interesting to know how you've seen it kind of progress over the last 25 years, and just things compounding and getting worse and worse for the landlords. And I suppose it's now at that pointy end where things need to change in order for it to be more appealing. Do you mimic that build to rent model more in the way of not having any of those, I suppose, interest rates that are halved? Is that more appealing to investors, or there's just scope to change moving forward?
And look, I'm very supportive of the community. With tenants in our community, we have over 3,000 tenants as our agency. But the point of today is that the goalposts haven't moved for tenants. Rents have always gone up. They've gone up more lately. But the goalposts for landlord have been moved and moved again and moved again and moved again. And each time they moved the goalpost, the goal got smaller and smaller and smaller. And then what's happened is that's had a direct impact on tenants' rents going up, unfortunately. So out of today, what I want to say is we need more farmers. When a country needs more food, it's not about saying, hey, just give us more food. It's not about saying plant more seeds for more rice or wheat or whatever you want. It's about need to support the farmers. We support the farmers. The crops will grow. The crops will grow. There'll be more food. The property market is the same concept. Everyone's saying we need more houses. We need more investors in this market to fuel the development, to fuel the more properties, to fuel the building, to get it all going. And everyone's blaming population for it. It's not population's fault. The population curve in the last 30 years in the country has been consistent.
Yeah.
In the last where it exploded in the last year or two, it exploded negatively the year or two before. So it's a pretty similar curve the whole period. We need more investors.
Well, this is a final call to landlords then. Might not be sound appealing to enter the market, but there's certainly an opportunity for you to get in there.
When everyone zigs, you zag.
And on that note, thanks for joining us, Mark. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Anne. Love you, everyone. See you, bye.